Cool, yeah. So today I'm going to talk a little bit about our investment thesis and kind of what we like to see from blockchain projects. And to do that, I'm going to start with some really early history, about Bitcoin and about cryptocurrencies. And then I'm going to talk a little bit about some of the things we expect to see from crypto in the future. So quick bit of background about me. I'm with a fund called INBlockchain, INB. We're the largest crypto fund in China, and I think one of the largest institutional holders of Bitcoin in the world. We were early investors in Zcash and Saya and BitShares, Digix, a bunch of other interesting cryptocurrency projects. Besides investing, we also used to run an exchange called Yunbi, which was a top 10 cryptocurrency exchange. The Chinese government very nicely asked us to shut that down, and so we did. But we're now incubating some other exchange projects and ready to come back into that space. So personally, I'm a Jewish guy with a very distrust of authority. I come from a long line of people with pathological distrust of authority, many of whom have had firsthand experience with what happens when you let the people in charge and the government get too powerful. And since controlling the money supply is one of the key levers of state power, taking that away from them is something pretty meaningful. So I'm excited about cryptocurrency, maybe for different reasons than other investors. But no matter who you are, if you're investing in a new asset class, it makes sense not just to understand the likely events, but to understand the less likely events that would have an outsized impact on your investment. So today we're going to talk about a few of those. OK, so what is cryptocurrency? There's a big issue now, which is that a lot of different things are getting lumped into this same basket and talked about as if they were the same thing. So before we can really talk about cryptocurrency, we have to properly define what it is we're talking about. Like comparing Bitcoin to something like Ripple or IOTA is so far off base, it's not even apples or oranges. It's like comparing apples to like nail clippers or something. Only a fraction of these things that people are calling cryptocurrencies really are. So the question then becomes, what is our criteria for what a cryptocurrency is? In a word, it's decentralization. Only you can see decentralization isn't actually on this slide because we don't really care about decentralization just for itself. We care about decentralization because it's necessary for all the things that make cryptocurrency interesting. So the first of those is that cryptocurrency is unseizable. Cryptocurrencies are permissionless. Cryptocurrencies, by and large, enable privacy. And cryptocurrencies tend to have deflationary economics. And I'm going to go into each one of these things. Paradoxically, though, all of the best projects in this space actually kind of suck when it comes to performance. So right now, the Bitcoin blockchain can process maybe 7 transactions per second. There's some other blockchains that can do a little bit better than that. But for the most part, these blockchain systems are not interesting because they're high performance. For high performance, high trust situations, like a semi-centralized blockchain or a database is going to outperform a blockchain any day. And so we see these various projects, like IOTA or Ripple or whatever, that are basically centralized. They're eventually just going to converge on a database model. So really, I'm looking forward to the day that MongoDB or MySQL just releases a coin. Yeah. So then a brief digression. These projects that we think of as real cryptocurrencies, so the things on the left of that slide, we think these are bringing unique value to the world, and we think that they are going to be long-term very valuable on a timescale of years or decades or perhaps even centuries. In the short term, though, the price action in crypto markets has basically nothing to do with value. And so INB has been around for a while, and so I dug up some old slides, and I found this one. This is a picture of CoinMarketCap from 2013. I don't know if any of you can guess what coin this is. Back then, there was this coin. This is, I believe, called Megacoin. And Megacoin was going to be the next Bitcoin. It was looking really good. It had done 100x. And then you zoom out a little bit, and you see what happened. And so we have this theory here. There's this great Ben Graham quote about the nature of markets. So Ben Graham says, in the short run, the market is a voting machine. But in the long run, it's a weighing machine. And so we know that when you vote in low information environments, it can produce some pretty weird outcomes. This is something Americans are extremely familiar with at the moment. But we think in the long run, these things tend to even out, and the market does turn into a weighing machine that allows the cream to rise to the top. OK, so let's talk a little bit about these things that we were saying make a cryptocurrency interesting. The first one is unseizability. And so what that means is it's just really hard to take someone's crypto away from you. I'm not going to go into too much detail about this technically, but it's possible to split a cryptographic key in such a way that someone has to go to the literal ends of the earth to take your crypto from you. So who actually needs this? The ultra-rich definitely need it. So if you have a seizure-resistant way to store value, it's really useful because the ultra-rich are frequently getting their assets frozen. This can happen for all sorts of reasons. Often it's just because the political party in power doesn't like you. So this guy that I put on the slide, this is Prince Al-Walid. And he used to be running Saudi's largest investment vehicle until a couple months ago when he was arrested and had all his assets frozen after he lost favor with the people in power. The reason I put him on here, ironically, is that days before he got arrested, he went on TV and said a lot of nasty stuff about Bitcoin. So the irony here is pretty delicious. I'm not saying there's a curse on people that talk bad about Bitcoin, but there might be a curse. Okay, so who else? Unseizability is also really important for the extremely poor. And in particular, this is an issue close to my heart as a Jewish person, for potential victims of genocide. So when people think of genocides, they think of death camps and gas chambers. But really what the early stages of a genocide look like is more like this painting here. This was like the Ottoman genocide 500 years ago. So the victims are first driven off their land, and they're unable to take much of value with them. And in many cases, people die because while the signs that something really bad is coming, you can't just sell all your assets and liquidate fast enough to leave. And then they wait, and then it's too late. So it's really easy to scoff at the idea of putting Bitcoin in the hands of refugees or genocide victims, but it might not actually be as far off as people think. So in the same way, if you go to Kenya, nomadic cattle herders in Kenya, all have cell phones, all have smart payments, all are using mobile payments. They don't have running water, but they do have these things. So I think it's quite possible that Bitcoin or cryptocurrencies will end up being an appropriate technology for safe storage of assets, even in places that are quite technically limited in other ways. So yeah, another group that really needs an unseizable store of value is literally anyone that's doing something that governments don't like. So our friends at WikiLeaks, they had all of their conventional payment rails cut off. So you couldn't use Visa to send them money. You couldn't use Western Union, which honestly, as an American, I found really offensive. It's my money. If I want to send it to someone, I should be able to, but we weren't. And so they actually were forced to switch to Bitcoin. So they had no interest in Bitcoin at the time. And so then Julian tweeted this, which I thought was pretty funny. He said, "My deepest thanks to the US government, Senator McCain and Senator Lieberman, for pushing Visa, MasterCard, PayPal, Amex, moneybrokers, et cetera, into erecting an illegal banking blockade against WikiLeaks starting in 2010. Guys, they bought Bitcoin in 2010. It caused us to invest in Bitcoin with a 50,000% return. That worked out. I guess so the last group that we think How do I go back? Oh, there we go. So the last group that we think unseizability is likely to be important for is corporations. So if you're a company and you're operating globally, you're going to be in some jurisdictions that are pretty sketchy. And if the government decides to change things up a little bit, your funds might be completely seized. So this happened in Turkey when the Turkish government switched over. Suddenly, all these companies had all their assets seized and they were done. And so if they had been able to hold Bitcoin, they would have continued to operate. So the next aspect that we think is interesting about crypto is that it enables privacy. So it enables private transactions, and it also enables you to privately hold wealth. No one really needs to know if you have any Bitcoin or not, although most Bitcoiners will constantly talk about having Bitcoin. But that's not a good idea. So if you use Bitcoin to buy stuff, it's actually not that private. But if you just hold Bitcoin, it's quite private. And over the next few years, it's getting a lot of upgrades, confidential transactions, et cetera, which will substantially boost the privacy of the system. And then there are other cryptocurrencies like Zcash and Monero and MobileCoin that are specifically addressing this privacy issue. So to understand why trustless privacy is an important thing, we can look at what happened with one of the most famous private banking systems. That was the Swiss banks at the outset of World War II. So these Swiss banks are famous for being very private. And initially, these Swiss banking laws actually protected Jewish depositors whose accounts legally could not be divulged to the Nazis, who came sniffing around after the war began. However, when many of the Jews who had their money stored in these Swiss banks were murdered during the Holocaust, the Swiss banks basically just decided to keep the money. And when their heirs came looking for it, many of them were turned away. So this turned into a giant lawsuit. It stretched on for years. Eventually, the banks lost, and the heirs were able to settle for over $1 billion. But the moral of the story here is pretty clear. Privacy is really important, and you can't trust anyone. Okay, so the third thing about cryptocurrencies that we like, this is not necessarily inherent to cryptocurrencies. I think it's actually just Satoshi decided to make Bitcoin deflationary, and then everyone else kind of had to copy him. And the reason for that is if there's a deflationary asset on offer, so if there's an asset where the supply is going to go down and we think the demand is either going to stay stable or go up, then it's hard to compete with that if you're an inflationary asset. And in a way, if you think about it, deflationary is pretty much the same as the first slide that I had about unseizability, because inflation itself is basically just a way of taking people's money away. So Keynes actually had a quote that I really like. He said, "By means of inflation, the government may secretly confiscate the wealth of the people, and not one man in a million will detect the theft." So Bitcoin famously deflationary. There's 21 million coins. There's actually a lot less than 21 million coins now. Like Bitcoin's kind of best kept secret is that like at least 1 million coins have been lost. There's a lot of coins that are in Satoshi's wallet that are never moving, and then every day people lose coins. So actually, Bitcoin is not really fixed issuance. It's like the amount of Bitcoin in the world goes down every day. We think that matters, right? So like if you look at these two graphs, like even the US dollar, which is by all accounts a pretty well-managed currency, the inflation is destroying the value of your money every day. And then if you look at countries like Venezuela, like this graph is just the opposite of a startup hockey stick graph. It's pretty terrifying. And the inflation there is extremely destructive. So we think that these deflationary cryptocurrencies actually have something pretty important to offer the world. OK, so permissionless, that was the last one. Permissionless systems are pretty interesting, and I think before crypto, it's been pretty hard to create them. So like, what that means, what I mean by this is that you don't need anyone's approval to go build something on top of Bitcoin. So it's not like you had to like go get Satoshi to say, yes, you can like do the Lightning Network. No, you can just go do it. And as a result, a lot of cool stuff gets built on these cryptocurrency projects. So you have stuff like all these apps on Ethereum. You have Augur. You have CryptoKitties. On Bitcoin, you have these payment networks. You have even centralized businesses like Coinbase are able to just go build. But really, the most important thing about permissionlessness isn't that you don't have to get anyone's permission to start, but rather that you know that no one can force you to stop or cut you off. So like I'm a huge fan of Twitter. I use Twitter like pretty obsessively. It's kind of the only social network that I actually like. And back in the day, Twitter had all these cool apps and third-party systems. Favestar.fm. They had all these different mobile apps and everything. And then they basically all got cut off. So like Twitter decided, no, we want to do this ourselves. They shut off the API, and that was it. These businesses just were done immediately. So if you have something that can be permissionless, that you can continue to build on, you're going to see an amazing flourishing of stuff getting built on top of it. And indeed, that's what we're seeing with these cryptocurrencies. OK, so performance was not on this slide, right? And I actually think that these blockchain networks are unlikely to be performant for a while. There's a lot of interesting approaches to this, right? You can use something like Lightning, where you have payment channels. There's these guys, Seller, who are at this conference today, and I think they have an approach to scalability that I really like. There's Cadena, which is doing these multiple side chains and SPV proofs between them. There's all these different approaches. It would take me like 50 more talks to go through all of them. I think what's important, though, is that it's very hard to figure out whether this progress being made is real or not. So like most of the developments here are being made by people that are at the absolute forefronts of their field. And even other highly technical people have difficulty figuring out like whether this is an actual breakthrough or whether it's not really going to work. So anyone that's telling you that they're sure about a given scaling solution, or any startup that's pitching you and saying our blockchain can do 10,000 transactions per second, is almost definitely lying to you. And when I hear these projects, I pretty much instantly lose interest, because the nature of these decentralized systems is they are going to be less performant. I guess the optimistic thing, though, is that a huge amount of the top-tier tech talent in the world has become really interested in scaling these decentralized systems in a trust-minimized way. And it seems like we're starting to make some progress. So we have Lightning, like I said. I think the Seller guys are doing something really cool. I think the Cadena guys are doing something really cool. It's not going to be fast. It's going to be slow progress. There's no silver bullets. But I do think like at the end of the day, we will end up with some pretty high-performance blockchain systems. OK, so what can we build with these pieces? We have this trustless private money that is deflationary and that's permissionless. I think right now, if you look at like the pitches that you get as a blockchain investor, you would think that blockchains are useful for absolutely everything. Like blockchains, blockchains for entertainment, blockchains for social media. I think most of these things are bullshit. And I think really right now there's only 3 clear use cases for blockchain, but it's really good at all 3 of these. So the first one is money. So that's just like Bitcoin, right? Like you have a decentralized money. It's probably the hardest money that we've ever invented, by which I mean it's the hardest to inflate. So like fiat money, the government can inflate. Even gold, like you can just mine more gold, whereas Bitcoin is a very hard limit at 21 million. The second one that I like is like financial products and derivatives. So you can make, using smart contracts, these really interesting sort of financial vehicles. You can make prediction markets. We got a pitch from a product that I thought was pretty cool, where they were like, if you're a farmer and you need to have insurance against rain, so like if it doesn't rain enough, your crops are going to fail. And so you'd like to be able to buy something that pays out if that happens. But in fact, most of these insurance companies in the third world just cheat the farmers. And so like very simply, you can have a smart contract, and the smart contract pays out either if it doesn't rain. And so you can have all these sort of exotic financial products. And I think blockchain systems and trustless systems are really great for this. And then the last one that I think has been kind of underexplored, but a lot of cool projects are coming out in this space, are like native digital assets. And so you hear now a lot about security tokens, or about the idea that someone's going to like tokenize stock. I'm not very excited about that. However, like if you look at a lot of the big exchanges, so like Binance has BNB, Huobi has HT, OK has OKB. These are actually pretty interesting digital assets. So like in a way, they're sort of like a stock. But because the exchange's profits are pretty easy to predict just using their exchange volume, you can actually have these things that are like a valuable digital asset. And it's pretty different from a traditional security. The other one that always comes to mind to me is like if you think about it, the DNS system, so like Google.com, Facebook.com, whatever, these were sort of the original digital asset, right? Like these are something way before Bitcoin that had value that only existed in the digital world. And I think we'll start to see the tokenization and the decentralization of a lot of those things. OK, so I went to college in Peking University in Beijing, and there was a professor there that had this really great quote. So I think if we want to like really get out there and think like, what's the really weird stuff we can build with blockchain, this guy had a good point. He says, it's absolutely possible for a non-territorial sovereign state to exist in the world without holding a single piece of land. OK, so maybe you can start a country with blockchain. So I think we would start by talking about how to not start a country. And we have a lot of really awesome examples there. So like all these people that try to start new countries, they have something in common, which is that they fixate on the most superficial part of what makes a country, land. So they all want to get some land. And like the sea land guys, these guys on the right, they took over like this concrete platform. Doesn't look like a very fun place to live. The seasteading guys want to like build these platforms in the ocean. There was this group called Minerva that took over this small Tongan island, and then immediately Tonga came and took it back. Roger Ver and some other people like that are trying to like buy some land. The problem with this approach is pretty simple. So like most of the time what happens is that someone just kicks you off the land. Like you say you're a country, and they say, no, you're not. And they just kick you out. And because no one else has agreed that you are a country, you don't have any diplomatic relations, no one's going to come and help you. So some people think maybe the approach is like you get a special economic zone, which basically means you carve out a little piece of a country, and you have some of your own laws. But the problem with that is like if it's successful, then the country that you're within is just going to take it over. And again, like no one thinks you're a country, so you're not going to get very far there. OK, so what actually makes a country? The recognition of other countries is the first thing. And that's it. There's nothing else. That's all you need. So this is known as the constitutive theory of statehood. It's definitely the theory that's most in line with reality. And it's not, if you notice, it's not really binary, right? So like, there's definitely some places that they think they're countries, and some parts of the world also think they're countries, maybe like Taiwan or Tibet. And China does not definitely think that Taiwan's a country. And so we have this is a non-binary thing, which I think is very realistic. It's kind of how the world works. OK, so if you did want to start a new country, sort of how would you, what's step one if it's not to get land? The step one is to get money. So the first thing the new country needs is a bank account. The basis of every diplomatic relation is economic relations, and so you need to raise a sovereign wealth fund. The problem here is that if you go to open a bank account to fund a new country, you're going to have to pick some other country to put the bank account in. And the second you stop being like a cute project that's being run out of whatever country, the banking is going to be gone. That country is going to shut your bank account down, take all the money, and the project is over. So you probably see where this is going. It's pretty simple. Our new country's sovereign wealth fund is just a Bitcoin address. So the founders just pool money into an address or a set of addresses. And once they have enough to start doing interesting things with it, they just declare a sovereign entity. So maybe they could call it like the first distributed republic. OK, so now that you have this money, the next thing you want to do is establish diplomacy via trade and investment. You have the sovereign wealth fund now. You want other countries to play with you as equals. So at first, the countries that are going to be interested in talking to this crazy new country are probably going to be either ideologically well-aligned countries, so guys like Iceland or other countries like that that are really interested in this kind of new free model, or ones that are desperately in need of foreign investment. And in both cases, the new country can basically just make large investments from the sovereign wealth fund in exchange for establishment of diplomatic relations with the new country. A country maybe in the developing world wants to build, for example, a large solar plant. They don't have the capital to do it. The new country will invest that capital in and then actually can use the solar power to mine cryptocurrency until local demand is enough to meet supply. What's interesting here is that you have this sort of bootstrapping process, right? So each time a new country decides to recognize the new one, the value of the FDR token, if you issue a token here, or even if you just hold Bitcoin, is going to go up a lot. So there might be a case for you to issue your own crypto token. You could also just stick with Bitcoin. In either case, though, like the more countries recognize you, the better, and you start getting this virtuous cycle. And so with this bootstrappable process, this national fund can continue to make foreign investments, continue to get recognition, and the currency will continue to appreciate. As a bonus, whenever you establish diplomatic relations with a country, you actually get an embassy there. And so as you establish more and more embassies, you've truly created sort of a distributed, decentralized country. The other kind of neat thing about this is if you think about it, like most of the services that countries offer these days, they're basically virtual and they have nothing to do with land. So like once you have diplomatic relations with a bunch of countries, you could issue a passport, you could issue corporate domicile. Every blockchain project could, instead of being based in BVI or Cayman, just be based in this new entity. There's a lot of interesting stuff you can do there with this jurisdiction that's custom designed for these distributed entities. You could have a decentralized arbitration service. You could offer that to both citizens and corporations that are domiciled there. It could become a fairly interesting thing pretty quickly. And what we see is there's sort of a prisoner's dilemma here where the countries that are faster to adopt this are going to get more of the money. And so even though no countries really want to recognize a new country, you can see sort of a defection process happen. Then eventually, once you have, let's say recognition of half the world, and the sovereign wealth fund now controls, 20% of Bitcoin, then if you want, you can go get some land and instantiate this virtual entity in the real world, sort of like a Louisiana purchase of the 21st century. This isn't out of the question. So a lot of US territory that we think as naturally just being part of the US, we actually just bought it from Russia and France. So you can buy land. There's actually some real downsides to having land, though. If you have land, then someone can invade you. If you have no land, you're kind of invincible. So it's a practical possibility that maybe this new kind of country established on the blockchain would actually just never want land at all. So this is the kind of stuff we think about as investors fairly often. We're investing in projects, we're looking at sort of everything that everyone else is looking at. But we think there's a lot of sort of revolutionary potential in these blockchain applications that might end up representing the large portion of the returns here. And I hope that, everyone that's working on these blockchain projects will try to go a little farther than the sort of normal, startup stuff. And they won't get just stuck in a rut of making decentralized Facebook or whatever it is. If you'd like to get updates on the type of project I talked about today, you can actually scan this QR code. And I have a newsletter that updates about them every week. And then if anyone has any questions, I'm happy to take them.
All right, we got a question.
Hi, Ryan. I'm curious about the no land and citizenship. So, if your parents are this virtual country and you're born, have you thought about how that would work out?
No, not at all.
Why not?
No, I think so. My guess is that in the beginning, most people would be dual citizens of this kind of an entity plus an actual landed country, and maybe you would kind of evolve from there. It's pretty hard to predict. These things are kind of emergent, but I would imagine that you're going to start out with mostly dual citizens.
I like it though. You gotta make this happen.
Yeah. Last time I gave this talk, there was this guy from Papua New Guinea in the audience, and he got really excited and then kind of went and did it. So in Papua New Guinea, there's this island now that's separate from Papua New Guinea that's a blockchain country or something. So we'll see how that goes.
Great. Do we have more questions? Yeah.
So I'm thinking in the reverse way. I think a country is such a out-of-dated concept. Maybe you don't need any country at all, right? Because a country is just a bunch of public services combined, right? If you can offer a judicial service, a military service, a social benefit separately using blockchain, why do you need a country at all?
Yeah, it's interesting. I kind of think of the international system as an API. There's this the sort of the UN, all these systems, they're sort of this API that you kind of have to be a country to plug into. And so there probably is some usefulness in having a sovereign entity. But I think you're right. A lot of these things, that the government used to provide are now being provided by private companies and will probably eventually be being provided by decentralized networks.
Okay, any more questions? Yep, okay.
For the concept of country you just mentioned about, you're missing citizens.
Sorry, what?
You're missing citizens of the country. There's no people in the country.
Who will be citizens?
So the API you mentioned,
yeah.
There's no the definition of citizens. There's no people in the country. Is that fine for the blockchain country concept you mentioned?
So what you're saying is
there's no people in the country. Is that fine?
Oh, you mean no people in a specific region, physically, or? Because you imagine that someone could become a citizen of this entity, right?
Then you have the problem of how to persuade them to recognize this country, other than other countries recognize this as country.
I'm not sure I understand the question. So what you're saying is you want to know how to get citizens to recognize the country?
Yes.
Oh yeah. Well, you imagine that there's going to be a lot of people that would just be excited to be part of something like this. So if something like this existed, I would probably join up, and I think a lot of my other sort of blockchain investor friends would too. And then the question of like how do you determine who's a citizen? That's a great one. I think there's a lot of work being done there. No one's really figured it out.
Okay, thanks.
Yeah.
Any more? Yeah. Wait, why don't we get this guy? No, please go ahead. This guy got a question. I think it's the last one.
How much capital do you actually think is required to start this?
Yeah, it's a really good question. We had like a funny investment committee meeting where we talked about this. I think it's at least a couple billion, because you need to be doing pretty large-scale infrastructure investments in order for countries to start paying attention to you. That said, like, you know, I've bounced this idea around a few of our friends that are like very early Bitcoin investors, and they're pretty into it. So it's definitely not something I'm going to do, but I think something like this will end up happening. I would be pretty surprised if there's not some sort of like decentralized sovereign entities over the next 10 years.
All right, great. I think that's it. Did you want to get one in real quick?
I'm just curious your take on the real estate side of things and how that could possibly be changing of how people hold equity in projects. And does that interest you in any way?
It's kind of cool, but it's like not really in our wheelhouse. We tend to invest more in like decentralized protocols, and so I feel like the real estate token stuff, it's more real estate than if you know what I mean.